Well, this time I wish to you a good afternoon. Happy to see you again, twice in the same day. I am very happy. So I am going to present shortly, because we are late, something which could be interesting for farmers, but also for other people. In fact, the story began when I received a lot of calls from farmers, from beekeepers, or for the general public, asking to me about the toxicity of pesticides. And I realized that it was very useful to be able to inform people about the toxic characteristics of pesticides, and that this information should be available online freely. So I propose to present that to you. I have another picture with the same neonicotinoid, such as this morning, as an example, and I will show you how this software works. But I wanted also to give to you some messages about the history, a little bit of history before beginning. What was advertised before and after the First World War? And I found this picture very interesting. And in fact, before the First World War, there was some information given to farmers showing that birds were the best friends of farmers against aphids, bugs, and other insect pests. And on this picture, you can see a farm here with crops growing and a line here, a defense line against pest insects, and birds here, because they are eating insects for breeding their chicks, were considered as good allies to farmers. And you can see here written that there is a sanctuary for birds to help farmers to fight against pests. This is very interesting because it concerns all kinds of pests. And now you can compare after the First World War. Here we are. You have the farm, the crops growing, but instead of birds, you have a line of defense against pests, which is constituted of chemicals. And you see hellebore, peregrine, kerosene emulsion, and so on, which are used to kill pests. No question of birds helping farmers to fight pests, but this is just chemicals. And what is interesting, if you look attentively to this picture, is to this farmer here and here shooting birds, because birds are competitive to farmers because they eat seeds. So the change is birds were with farmers before the First World War, and then on this advertising, birds are on the other side. This is interesting to see. So now let's go to pesticides. There are three major classes of pesticides. You know that. Mainly herbicides, with glyphosate as the best example. Fungicide, with the example of boscalid, with the commercial name Pictor Pro. And insecticides here, with imidacloprid. We were speaking this morning about neonicotinoids, and in particular about imidacloprid. And the formulation was Gaucho, as taken as an example. And I said this morning that I have an interesting picture about insecticides with a ladybug and aphids. And what is interesting, if you remember well, when using insecticide, you will kill aphids and you will kill ladybugs as well. But if you leave nature alone, this ladybug will eat 100 aphids a day. So that was my conclusion this morning. Do with nature and not against nature. Well, let's go to the generalities and keep in mind that there is a publication here showing this. When using pesticides with their formulants, you will have residues everywhere. In plants, of course, in insects, and even in mammals. And this phenomenon of transfer, bioaccumulation, bioconcentration, which has been demonstrated, leads to huge problem for our health. It could be endocrine disruption, carcinogenic, hepatotoxic, cytotoxic, neurotoxic, reproductive disease, as well as developmental outcomes and also teratogenic problems. Okay? So you should keep this in mind. What kills bees generate problems for our health. It's what I was saying this morning. Now, another point which is very important, I want to discuss this with you, is that often companies, they say, well, it's not a question of product, it's a question of dosage, doses. And they cite Paracels, who said something in German. I am not able to pronounce that properly, but it says that's not the, everything is poison. But if you are under the threshold, this poison will become safe. But it was in 1937, and from then, people, you know that at this date, people also believe that the Earth was flat. And I said that since then, toxicology has demonstrated many cases to the contrary. And the best example is given by endocrine disruptors. And what is interesting, following my talk this morning, is that among the examples that was given to say this is not the dose that makes the poison, you have nicotinoid, dioxin, dieldrin, and also some endocrine disruptors. So keep in mind this. This is not always the dose which makes the poison. The simple presence of some chemicals makes the poison. Okay, let's go further and just give the summary of what is going on with neonicotinoid, but also with other pesticides. When you use them as seed dressing, for instance, you have to know that most of the pesticides stays in the soil, 80 to 98%. Only 2% is taken up by the plant and contaminates the plant, but also nectar and pollen, with the effect on bees. All these remaining pesticides are leached to surface water. First, the presence of the pesticide in the soil affects the soil biota. And we had the example of earthworms this morning. The second example is given by aquatic arthropods, means invertebrates living in surface water. And the depletion of these aquatic arthropods leads to effects on birds, for instance, because they lack of prey to raise their chicks. Okay, we understand all that. But there is also some other sources of exposure. And I want to cite this one. When farmers are using pesticides, the same pesticides for their livestock against parasites, you will find these pesticides in manure and slurry on the livestock itself, then in air, in soil, and in plants, and the feces. And then plants will be exposed to these pesticides, and with plants exposed to this pesticide, you will find the chemical in flower and pollen, and bees will be exposed too. So we demonstrated that for several insecticides, and in particular for imidacloprid, the example I chose this morning to give my talk. So I introduce here the One Health concept. It's very simple. If you put a pesticide somewhere, don't believe it will disappear. And the health of the environment is linked to the health of livestock and wild animals, and linked also to our health. This concept of One Health considers that when you put a chemical in the environment, one day or another, it will finish in our food and affect our health. Okay? So, with this concept, it is urgent to know the properties of each pesticide. And knowing that, we can apply integrated pest management to avoid using the highly toxic pesticides. So about integrated pest management, almost everything has been said just before with Lorenzo Furlan, but I want to insist on the fact that there is a lot of practices in integrated pest management. And Lorenzo Furlan, just before, he was speaking about mutual fund, the insurance cover, okay? But you can see that on this table that there is a lot of practices that are possible that have to be combined together for each crop in each location to avoid the use of pesticides, the highest toxic pesticides, okay? So now I go to Toxibees. The idea is we cannot change suddenly our agricultural practices. It's impossible. Farmers are not ready to change like this. But maybe gently we can move from the most toxic pesticides to less toxic pesticides, and then to integrated management, and then maybe to agroecology or organic farming. So we build this software to inform. Toxibee is a tool for farmers. And if you are convinced, you will disseminate this information. How does it work? First, we have a methodology. The methodology consists of considering 10 criteria to evaluate the toxicity and the exposure of a pesticide in the environment and their effect to bees. About these 10 criteria, which has been analyzed, they concern active ingredients, and 4 criteria concern hazard to bees. 6 of these criteria concern the environmental behavior of pesticides, what I call exposure. Let's go further. So now you are a user and you want to know about specific pesticides. So you go on the website, and how does it work? You just have to enter the name of the molecule of interest in the search bar. You will see the identity card of this molecule. You can add it to my selection, because you can select several molecules to compare, and then you click. So I took the example of imidacloprid again. If you don't know the name of the active material, you just have the formulation name, you can go on the product label to get the name of the active material, or you can consult an official pesticide website, or you just search on the internet. It's easy. So taking the example of imidacloprid, you will find this. This is the identity card of imidacloprid. You have first a scale of hazard from green to red. Minimum here in green, maximum here in red. I will explain how it is calculated. You have the same thing for exposure from green to red. And you can see that about hazard to B, the imidacloprid is classified as E, the worst note. And about exposure, it is classified as D. It is not a worst note, but it's a bad note. And combining hazard and exposure, you will have a scale here, what we call a Toxi score, saying that you are in this situation, a very bad situation for bees and for the rest of living system. Okay? So the Toxi score of this substance is in relation to pollination is very high. Okay? It's it is written here in French. The Toxi score combines a very high hazard indication and a very high environmental exposure indication for pollinator. So you have the global answer. In fact, this toxic score was calculated with 4 criteria of toxicity. And for imidacloprid, for instance, you have an acute oral toxicity, extremely toxic by oral absorption. About the acute contact toxicity, it was found that it was extremely toxic by contact. I translate. About chronic toxicity, this substance is capable of causing physiological and behavioral damage to pollinators at repeated and very low doses. Repeated doses, this is chronic intoxication, and very low doses means that even you lower the doses, you still have effects. You remember this morning, I show you that even lowering the doses, there was still mortality after 1 week. And the last criteria is about synergy. It is said that this substance is capable of interacting with other factors and making pollinators more vulnerable to other chemicals or disease. This said, when you mixed pesticides, imidacloprid will be more toxic. Now let's go to the exposure criteria. We examine the systemicity. So high potential for contamination of bees' food resources, its degradation in soil. This explains that after months, after years, you will find again imidacloprid in soil. So a very high lifetime in soil, high potential for soil contamination. The photodegradation criteria, here very short life in the presence of UV light. This is a good news. Solubility, which poses a problem in this case, high solubility in water, high potential for contamination of surface water. Hydrolysis, very long lifetime in water, very high potential for contamination of surface water. And bioconcentration, the last one, very low potential for accumulation in living organisms. This is a good news. What does also you have a problem of I wait a few seconds. Is it work now? Okay. So the first part of the software gives some information about the pesticides. There is another part giving some advices. What you should avoid to do and where are the best practices. So, very briefly, I can give you information on imidacloprid. The first advice is avoid using. Simply. Remember that neonicotinoids are banned in Europe. They are used anyway in Germany for sugar beet as spray, but not in France. The second advice is avoid using on rainy days because of the solubility of imidacloprid. Do not treat twice. Usually farmers, to be sure that there is no pest insect, they treat once, twice, and sometimes 3 times. Do not use during foraging. Of course, I would say. Prefer another substance, yes. Do not treat flowering plants. That's evidences, but you know, farmers, they don't know sometimes. And do not mix with other pesticides. This is recommendation coming from the characteristic of the molecules. And the best practice, the first one is communicate with farmers. If you are a beekeeper, you should know when the farmer is going to treat. And you should also try to convince the farmer not to use such molecules. Choose another substance with a lower toxic score, of course. And it is easy because you will see that you can select some substances and to see their effect on bees. Treat at night. Sometimes it's better to treat during night or at night because bees are not foraging at this moment of the day. Treat in the absence of flower, away from pollinators and without other pesticides. For you, this is very simple to understand, but imagine a farmer who will use this software. Probably the first time he heard about this issue of pollinators. And there is, I don't want to go into details, but there is a list of recommendations to lower the risk for pollinators and to go to alternatives. What can I do? What can I do to adopt the best possible practices for pollinating insects during my treatment? How to avoid treatment by using agroecology. Okay, I don't want to give all details because you are not farmers, but this is in construction and we will add day after day some recommendations for farmers. So now let's go to the real life. And I take 2 examples. And the first example is not concerning bees. I did it on purpose. The question, because you are beekeepers, you are aware of bees, but this software is constructed for everyone. And one of the questions that often occurs is for treatment of cats, dogs, for pets against fleas and ticks. So I choose this question about the cat's parasite treatment. If I use Toxibees to get some information, first I will have an information about the treatment sold by Bayer about this Seresto formulation. And you have to know that if you look to the active material which is in Seresto, you will find 1.29 grams of imidacloprid. What is banned for crops by Europe is still registered for treatment of pets. So you cannot use imidacloprid outside, but it is permitted to use it inside on your pets. Surprising, no? But this is not the only pesticide in it. There is also flumetrin. And beekeepers, they know flumetrin, because flumetrin is used against varroa. You have this formulation here, another formulation here. It is even used on cows against parasites. So Seresto mixes these two products, okay? So if you use Toxibee to know better your treatment, you will find this, a graph where all insecticides registered in Europe are plotted. This is the toxicity axis here, horizontal. Less toxic, the most toxic. This is the exposure for bees. Here, vertical line. The less exposure, the worst exposure. And not surprisingly, you will find imidacloprid here. This is one of the worst insecticides used in agriculture, but also for veterinary purposes. And now with this graph, you can compare toxicities of active material. You just have with your mouse to be on this point. You will have this information about exposure, toxicity, and the toxic score, the global note. And when you move the mouse, you go from here to another places, and you will have the identity card of all these chemicals. Very easy to handle. I cannot do the experience here because videos are never working when I make a presentation, but just try, go on the site, and you will see that it works very easily. So the graph compares the toxicity and exposure of active ingredient substances with other substances in the same category of use. Means that all insecticides are plotted here. And if you do that, you go to less toxicity and to less exposition for bees, and you can find, for example, azadirachtin, for which the global note is C, less toxic, and less exposure to bee. And it is an insecticide that farmer can use. Okay? So we were there and we are now here. And of course, I am going to check. So in the search bar, I type the name, azadirachtin. I find it here as an insecticide. Okay? The note is C. The toxic score is C. And I can have the details. And you can see that we are not in the red part, but we are in the orange part here with all the characteristics of this molecule, which is better for bees and better for the environment. So with this example, we went from the worst insecticides to a better one. And now, because my goal is to treat my cat, I can go on Google, search for azadiractin, and I will see commercial proposition for treatment of my cat. So I still have the proposition of Seresto. I have another one, Frontline, using fipronil. Fipronil is one of the worst insecticides, and it is forbidden in Europe for crop production, but not for veterinary treatment. And all these two have toxic score very high, and the consequence, you know the consequences for bees, but azadiractin is sold in France as Vetoscan or another formulation, less expensive, interestingly, quite less expensive. And in Germany, I was searching for a German formulation in Germany, and I found this one, which is less expensive too. So I know how to treat my cat against fleas and ticks with a friendly, environmental friendly molecule. I take a second example this time. And we are leaving the scope of insecticides and we go to fungicides. And I want to speak about boscalid, which is a well-known fungicide in agriculture. Some information about boscalid, or what I call SDHI fungicides. SDHI for succinate dehydrogenase inhibitors fungicides. This is a well-known family of fungicides, and the first one were sold in the late 16 as carboxin, fenfuram, benzodanil. But since then, the family of this fungicide was growing, and you will find, for instance, boscalid here, okay? And it was sold in the beginning of the year 2003 exactly. These fungicides are used by farmers against fungi, of course, and two main families. At the beginning, they were used against basidiomycetes, with these diseases of plant here. Then the family became larger to include also ascidomycete, which is another family of fungi, okay? And you have the disease here on plants. And they are working well. They are highly used in crop production, but they pose problem. They pose problem first for bees. You remember this morning I have shown a graph of mortality along the time of exposure, by chronic exposure. You have the results of a publication here showing that with boscalid, on more than 20 days, even you lower the dose, you have a high mortality at high doses, but when you lower the doses, you still have mortality with boscalid, which is not an insecticide, but a fungicide killing bees. This is very important because in commercial formulations, sometimes you have a fungicide and an insecticide, and there is synergy between the two. So the fungicide itself has an effect on bee health. It's not an effect which can be seen on 1 or 2 or 3 days. So for registration, it is okay. But if you look with a longer time to the effect of this fungicide, you will see some mortality is here. Okay? So boscalid is one of the fungicides posing the worst problem to bees. Sorry. Yes. So now we are going to develop a little bit of science. How it works. What are these fungicides called SDHI? In fact, they act at the mitochondrial level. Every cell of your body has a mitochondria. This is the energy of the cell. And here is the mitochondria. And if you look inside the mitochondria, there is a mitochondrial crystal. And this fungicide is acting at this level. And particularly, it takes the place of a natural compound, and it blocks the Krebs cycle of the cell. And doing this, I don't want to go into detail, but doing this, it kills the cells because there is no more energy for the cells. So this is what we call in science the respiratory chain of the cell. And boscalid is acting at this level. For bees, it's a catastrophic situation. But let's go to humans to see if there is some effect. SDHI, they are active on all living organisms because all living organisms possess mitochondria in every cell. And for instance, these fungicides are sold as nematicide to kill worms. Not fungi, worms. This is really different, but it works for worms. They stop the respiratory chain and they increase the succinate and one molecule, natural molecule, which is called alpha Kg. You can forget the details, but doing this favors cancer. It is demonstrated. So, using such fungicides is a risk for our health. So now, for bees, this fungicide is classified as C. It's almost D, but it's classified as C. It represents a moderate hazard for bees, because don't forget, it is a fungicide, this is not an insecticide. So in the scale of danger for bees, of course, insecticides are the worst, but this is the worst fungicide for bee, in fact. And for exposure, it is classified as I. Now, let's try to find a fungicide of less potential effects on bees. And on the graph, you have all the fungicides that are sold in Europe, and you can see that boscalid is placed here, okay? So one of the worst toxicity and a high exposure here. So let's try to move the mouse to find something better. I did that, and you have boscalid here, see almost red, which is a bad fungicide. But if you go from here to here, you will find this one, which is moderately toxic to bees, which is better, which is placed here. And if you go further, you will find this one, Bacillus, a species of Bacillus. This is a natural product, which has a very low toxicity here and exposing the bees almost nothing. Okay? So my advice would be to go from here to here and then to here. This is a good fungicide for farmers and good for bees, of course. So this software is very easy to handle and gives to you one or several solutions to change your toxic chemical to a less toxic one. So I said that I would be very short. We will have time to discuss. And my conclusions are very simple. Toxibees is a free software online for farmers, but also for others. More than 300 substances are referenced, all the substances that are registered in Europe, insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. It gives a global toxic score very easy to understand. You can compare between substances, you can make a better choice for substances, and the future steps will to develop the same software, but including the formulation, the name of formulation. It's easier to handle. And also develop the information on alternatives crop by crop. You are a farmer, you want to make some corn, you have solutions arriving, or wheat, or soya, or sugar beet, and so on. The idea is to phase out the worst pesticides, and particularly to stop prophylactic use, means the preventive use, when you treat before you know if you have pest, if you have insect pest, or if you are in the risk of damage, especially for fungi. To choose substance of less impact and to go toward integrated pest management or agroecology. And my advice is to use such kind of software to be an actor of change, to diffuse the present messages, and to communicate with farmers. They have new tools to choose better pesticides. And my very last conclusion would be, it's time to produce with nature again, not against nature. And I am looking for volunteers to broadcast Toxibees in Germany and in other countries. I have a volunteer for Italy because Lorenzo Ferran said to me just before, I am volunteer. So we are looking for volunteers to broadcast this such a software because we believe it could be useful for farmers and for changing the practices. And I want to finish presenting the people working on this project. Myself, but a researcher from Agronomical Research Council in France. This one is working for the Institute of Bee and Pollination, and these two girls are working for an association called Bee Friendly, who promote better practices in agriculture. And again, I want to thank my collaborators, all my collaborators, the beekeepers for their support and determination, and you for your attention. Thank you.
Also ich muss nur sagen, auf die Idee wäre ich nicht gekommen. Dass man hier Alternativen dann sucht, also den Weg bereitet dafür, weniger giftige Alternativen anzubieten. Die Frage ist, warum nehmen denn die Bauern das giftige Produkt? Wenn es weniger giftige gibt, ist das giftigere billiger als das weniger giftige?
Lorenzo Ferran, he shown that when you treat with insecticide, it costs about 40 euros per hectare. When you apply integrated pest management and you pay for mutual funds, the cost is quite lower, half the price of insecticide treatment. So why farmer does not change? This is a question of serenity, I would say. They are sure that with pesticides they will reach good harvest. They are frightened about pests. And the bank, you know, the bank gives money to buy a tractor or to buy material only if the farmer is sure to get the harvest. In case of doubt, the bank, you know, they are not so enthusiastic. So what I want to say is that farmers are used to use pesticides, and every change is complicated for them. Even we explain that changing to less toxic pesticide will be a good thing for environment, health, nature, and will save money, they hesitate because they are so used to these practices using pesticides that the change is difficult for them. So, Lorenzo Furlan said that you have two solutions. One way you convince, one way you ban. And I think that both of them could be together. The worst pesticide should be banned, of course, and then education of farmers should be done to go to IPM and to agroecology.
Sicher gibt es Meldungen.
Thank you.
Im Dirndl sitzen sie da. Wo sind wir? Hier.
Hallo, mich würde interessieren, ob die bereitgestellten Alternativen gleichwertige Wirkungen zeigen wie die toxischen Produkte.
Yes, if I understand well, there is one point that Toxibees is not dealing with, is efficiency. We should introduce in the software a graph of efficiency for farmers. Because, of course, the worst pesticides are very efficient. They are killing everything, okay? So the choice for farmer is a compromise between efficiency and cost, and also they're willing to go to less toxic products. Okay, so this is a lack in this software, but soon we hope to introduce for each molecule the efficiency on crop for farmer to choose with all the information available, and you will see that the efficiency of the alternative is really good. In fact, there is not so much difference in efficiency between less toxic molecule and the worst toxic molecules.
Ein Beitrag, eine Frage. Ja, es ist natürlich auch ein bisschen erschüttert durch diese Dinge, aber ja, das kommt aus Frankreich, gell? Und ich möchte daran erinnern, dass wir hier vor 4 Jahren schon mal einen französischen Kollegen von ihm da hatten, nämlich Gilles-Éric Serralini. der hier uns Glyphosat hat also gustieren lassen. Wir haben eine Glyphosat-Degustation gemacht. Wie schmeckt Glyphosat? Und wenn man einmal den Geschmack kennt, dann schmeckt man es auch im Wein zum Beispiel. Und da hat der Wirt, wir waren in einer anderen Lokalität, da hat doch der Wirt die Frage gestellt, ob diese Gläser, wo jetzt dieses Glyphosat drin ist, das natürlich in der Mischung, Gilles-Eric hat es in der Mischung angerührt, in der es auch im Bier zu finden ist, ob diese Gläser danach weggeschmissen werden müssen. Und ich wollte dann nicht weiter eskalieren und nicht sagen, das ist in jeder Flasche Bier drin, die du trinkst. Aber daran sieht man noch, dass plötzlich, wenn die Aufmerksamkeit auf ein Thema gerichtet wird, Ängste entstehen.
Well, about drinks. It's time to speak about drinks, and especially wine. I have not so much information for beer, but I have a lot of information for wine. First of all, I was born in a region of France around Bordeaux. And Bordeaux is a region where we produce a lot of wine, the wine of Bordeaux. And interestingly, there is about 30 to 40 treatments a year for vineyards. Means that you can find pesticides in wine, a lot of pesticides in number and in amount. And what is really interesting in France is that you have regulation for almost everything, maximum residue limit for apples, for pears, for salad, for tomatoes, cucumber, whatever you want. At the European level, it is the same thing, except for wine. You have maximum residue limit for grapes. I mean grapes you eat during your lunch, but not for wine. Why? Why is there no maximum residue limit for wine? Just because wine producer didn't want any limit for their products. This is interesting. I don't know for beer, but for wine, there is no limit in the amount of pesticide, in number and in amount of pesticides. So, no wine can be, you cannot say this wine is not legal or not. All wines that are produced in France are legal in terms of pesticides amounts. So this is the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer will consider these fungicides. And in fact, we analyzed food, general food of people, and we found that mostly these fungicides are found in vegetables and fruits. Not so much in other products, okay, meat, fish, and so on. And among the food and drinks, there is not so much fungicide like this in fruit juices, but in wine. In wine there is a lot of fungicide in wine. So my advice would be, and it's difficult for me to say that because I like wine, you know, I love wine. But for me, I would say that if you want to drink wine, go to organic wine.
Of course, there is a lot of good organic wine.
Yes.
Also in France.
And they are not so expensive.
Yeah.
Almost the same price.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
So for beer, I don't know, but I guess that probably the same causes makes the same conclusions.
But there is also organic beer.
Yeah.
And tonight we will.
That's a good
we
news.
will have one.
I'm not. I drink very few beer, you know, so I'm more interested in wine. Sorry for that.
Also jetzt möchte ich festhalten, dass ich ja dem Lorenzo kein Geschenk mitgegeben habe, weil er mit dem Flugzeug fliegt ohne Gepäck. Ihm werde ich ein Geschenk mitgeben, denn er ist mit der Bahn angereist aus Paris, gell? Und hat auch seine entzückende Gattin mitgebracht, die heute Abend auch bei uns beim Essen mit dabei ist. Also erstens mal vielen Dank für die Art der Anreise.
Thank you.
Und jetzt möchte ich doch unseren Ehrenschulmeister Eckhard Hülsmann hier noch auf die Bühne bitten für eine kleine Intervention. Da vorne steckt's. No, stay there. Stay there for a minute. In the light, please. Please both stay in the light. Das ist an. Du musst da neben ihm noch stehen.
Come with me in the light. Come with me in the light.
Alles klar. So, lieber Herr Dr. Bonmatin, sehr verehrte liebe Imkerfreunde und Freundinnen, ich bin erst morgen im Programm, dass ihr jetzt nicht durcheinander kommt. Ich möchte aber die Gelegenheit nutzen, hier mich bei Ihnen ganz öffentlich zu bedanken. Sie haben jetzt miterlebt, was er alles für ein Potenzial bringt. Wir hatten vor 15 Jahren, es jährt sich dieses Jahr 15 Jahre, den stummen Frühling in der oberrheinischen Tiefebene. Es wurde mit dem Clodionidin auf 70.000 Hektar alles vergiftet, was sich Insekt nennt. Also nicht nur unsere Honigbienen, Wildbienen, Schmetterlinge, Ameisen, Käfer, alles weg. Die Vögel weg. Die Jungen sind verhungert, weil die Nahrung nicht mehr da war für die. Das war das absolute Chaos, was wir erlebt haben, und nach dem Krieg gab es nirgendwo so eine Vergiftung. Der Leichenduft lag bei den Bienenständen in der Luft, denn dicke Teppiche von toten Bienen sind verwest vor den Völkern. Und jetzt kommt's. Uns Partnern hat niemand geholfen in dieser Katastrophe. Mit Ausnahme, das fällt leichter, der BUND, der hat gleich 2 Rechtsanwälte eingeschaltet. Aber sonst niemand, und ich überlasse es jetzt jedem, sich die vorzustellen, die uns hätten helfen können. Wir standen ganz allein, mit Ausnahme dem Dr. Bonmatin. Er kam auf eine Krisensitzung in Karlsruhe, Augustenberg, und hat in seiner unnachahmlichen, ruhigen, aber klaren Sprache das den Teilnehmern gesagt, was zu sagen war, nachdem Bauernverbände und alle möglichen uns eine neuartige Bienenkrankheit andichten wollten. Das Clodionidin in der 2,5-fachen Vergiftung wurde ausgebracht, und erstmalig auf der Welt mussten wir auch aus unseren Bienenvölkern sämtliche Pollenwaben entfernen, alle Imker, und abliefern in amtlichen Veterinärcontainern, die dann verbrannt wurden. Also der Geist war aus der Flasche, und keiner wusste, selbst Bayer nicht, wie die Geschichte wieder geregelt werden konnte. Und da möchte ich sagen, lieber Herr Bonmatin, auch nach 15 Jahren, normalerweise heißt es, Dankbarkeit ist ein Gefühl von kurzer Dauer. Nicht bei uns Partnern. Herzlichen Dankeschön nochmal.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm confused. I am getting red. Thank you. As a scientist, I would say just, I did my job. Only I did my job. Thank you very much.
So, und natürlich haben wir hier auch ein Dokument als Erinnerung und auch es ist eine große Ehre für uns, dass Jean-Marc zu uns gekommen ist und auch dir die Urkunde Ehrenschulmeister der Armbruster Imkerschule.
Great. I will put it in my office, of course, very proud of this.
You can also wrap a sandwich in it, you know.
Yeah. Thank you very much again. Thank you, Jürgen.
Thank you. Vielen Dank, dass du gekommen bist.
Vielen Dank.
Und vielen Dank für deine Arbeit für uns.
Ja.
Ja?
Danke, danke. Hopp.